Hello, fellow teachers and parents and therapists. Welcome to Resilient Families Thrive. My name is Linda Dell, and as a teacher on the virtual front lines, I can see the emotional fallout from COVID-19 and its toll on its families. I mean, I see the kids are anxious and afraid, parents are overstressed, and they're on call all the time now. And I was thinking, I've been working with parents and families and children for over 15 years now, and I was wondering if I could create a family resource by collaborating with other mental health professionals so that families could emerge stronger and more resilient and happier. And my goal is to help families address children's coping skills in engaging, fun, age-appropriate ways. And I wondered if families could do more than just survive, if they could thrive. So Resilient Thriving Family was born. And join me today as together we explore fun, creative ways for parents to help their children to curb fear, reduce anxiety, and increase happiness. I am super excited to be here with Karen DeHaven. She has always been my go-to person for children with challenging behaviors. Karen founded AHA Studio for Integrated Therapies, LLC, to expand her 20-year vision of creating an arts and psychotherapy private practice where women, children, and families can find emotional support. Her growing community of holistic practitioners believe that there is hope for everyone who is struggling on their journey to emotional health, wholeness, and well-being. You know, the world changed so radically after COVID-19. Do you remember where you were that day, the day that COVID-19 hit the pause button and the world shrunk to just face-to-face contact with our immediate family, and in a place where connection with the outside world became virtual?
Hi, Linda. Thank you so much for having me on this call. So back in March, there were two events that actually were about to happen. One on the Thursday that things started shutting down. I was going to be doing a Dance Your Dance party at a local store with another woman to be able to, the store owner at Frocks in Percy, to be able to tap into the community that I had been dancing with virtually for, at that point, I think it had been about 2 weeks that I had been jumping on every day to Facebook Live, and that got canceled. And then the next day, I had a women's circle that meets monthly at AHA, and we quickly moved over into a virtual circle instead of a face-to-face. And I just remember my energy sort of being like this, because I was going from a live event, which I know how to do, to suddenly having to navigate all of the details and technical elements of technology, which was very anxiety producing. And
challenging.
That state actually stayed with me for about 10 days or so, that I feel like I was in my dominant fight or flight pattern. Yeah.
Okay. And so is it hard? Did you find it hard to be optimistic, facing so much uncertainty? I mean, what helped you to adjust the best to this new normal?
So at the time that actually everything closed, my husband was traveling. And so until he got back, I was actually not just stuck in the house with myself and just contact with neighbors, but I was in complete isolation, and he was in such a remote area. He didn't even know what was going on.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I really found myself when typically I had another to be able to be navigating this with, I suddenly was absolutely without really any other human resources aside from what I could get through technology. And
Oh my gosh.
yeah, so being back in connection when my husband returned, that certainly was really helpful. And reaching out to family and calling people and checking in with them instead of saying, oh my gosh, I'm panicking, really just calling and saying, hey, how are you guys doing? Which is a pretty classic resilience behavior, rather than hyper-focusing on your own trauma story. Actually reaching out and saying, how are you? Because with our good relations, that of course is going to be reciprocated. And others will lean in and say, well, how are you? And then there is that duality of we're both in this together.
Okay, so that was a big learning curve.
It was a really big learning curve. And, one of the, whenever you're sort of on the front line, there really is something to be said for, it's okay to take the time to figure out where your feet are and how to ground yourself before you actually go and start helping others to find the ground for themselves. And I afforded myself the time to do that. So when I felt emotional and teary, I cried. And when I felt worried, it's actually a practice that I do. I will allow that worry and I will dance with that worry in its biggest expression for about 5 minutes. And I literally will look at the clock and say, okay, you've got 5 minutes to sort of occupy my brain and my body. And I'm a hand wringer and I pace, and my brain is very creative. And so I can come up with these wild scenarios very quickly. And I allow it for 5 minutes exactly. And at the end of that 5 minutes, I'm like, it is time to get back in the saddle. And I start my practices of actually, okay, usually it involves paper and pen. So I go and I get a notebook and I start writing, like, what do I need to do? What kind of things need to happen now? What's the most important? I start prioritizing lists. Okay. And with that, I begin being able to sort of stop taking flight, and I start being able to ground.
And you're taking more control in little bits and pieces. You're taking back some control.
Exactly. The opposite of anxiety is plan. So whenever we're moving into that anxious state, creating the plan, whether it's you talk it through with somebody or you write it down on a piece of paper or you get consultation with somebody else, it's really about, okay, what is the plan? And
okay, so having that plan is very helpful.
Absolutely. It's essential.
Essential. Okay. So how would you explain bouncing back and resilience to families who heard a lot about it, but not sure if it applies to them or what they should be doing?
Sure. The nature of resilience, if you think of resilience a little bit like a ball, that balls that are, let's say, bowling balls, not very resilient. They tend to crash things, they crack. If you throw it, it can break the ground.
Or your foot.
Or your foot, exactly. Or the next person's lane. I did that once.
That's true too. I didn't think about that.
I'm like, oh, sorry.
No problem. Go ahead.
So if you think of the human psyche and the human ability to cope as more like a rubber ball, what makes a rubber ball bounce? Well, it's soft, it's pliable, it's got give, right? There's flexibility to it. And so in times like this, when anxiety really is the predominant emotional response to the unknown, and that's natural. Depression is related to the past, whereas anxiety is related to the future. So if the future is uncertain, then anxiety is naturally going to be more present, particularly if you have a personality prone towards anxiety, but not exclusively, certainly. So how do we become a little bit more like a rubber ball rather than a bowling ball? Bowling balls are rigid. So as soon as we get into this is how I do it, we're really going to struggle in these type of situations. So if it's, this is the only thing that I eat, well, if that's not available, then you're actually setting yourself up for a higher stress level. So looking at what is available rather than this is how I do it and this is the only way that I do it. That's the beginning of resilience. So we really don't have to worry so much about the bounce as much as building resilient and flexible skills, both for ourselves first,
Mm-hmm.
then that translates over to how can you help your children and your family embrace more resilience in their lives.
So you have to start with yourself.
Absolutely. Always and forever.
Okay, in order to help others, which is what you said before, getting yourself grounded so that you could reach out to others.
So it really starts with taking deep self-care, being able to look inward and say, gosh, I'm feeling X, right? If you want to begin resilience, we need to start actually talking about our feelings and identifying them in exactly that way. Not in that makes me X. Nope, because that actually gives all of the power outside. So if something like COVID is happening, then that makes me a victim. And that's not the path to happiness. The path to happiness is actually to claim, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling worried. And once we can actually name the emotion, then we can start making a plan to address that emotional state. And when we can address our emotional state, it naturally begins to decrease if it's a negative emotional state, if it's a low energy state. We start making the plan and it starts bringing it up into a higher range of vibrance. If we're feeling, for instance, depressed, no, I don't want to choose stress. If we're feeling worried, then if we stop and say, I feel worried right now. Well, what do you feel worried about? I feel worried that I don't have enough time. Okay, so let's break it down. And then you start moving into making a plan and looking at how much you need to get done in the period of time that you have. You can start prioritizing and saying, actually, that one's not a high priority. I'm going to take that off the table. And then it breaks down to, there are actually 2 things that I really need to do. And I've got a half an hour to do it. I can make that happen. And by being able to have that level of self-efficacy, by doing that, that's then what brings us a sense of pleasure, internal pleasure. It also releases hormones in the brain that are related to pleasure states. And that's what leads to happiness.
Wow. Okay, so it changes your whole outlook and attitude, I think is what you're saying. Are there studies that support that? The studies that support, how being more flexible, being more resilient can lead to being happier.
Absolutely. There are a ton of studies. One of the researchers that I love, the work that he's doing, is Marty Seligman out of the University of Penn. He has, for the past 2 decades, been looking at positive psychology. What are the things that we do on a day-to-day basis? That's that mental hygiene piece. Not that he specifically coined that or anything, but it does relate back to the conversation that we're having. What are the things that we do on a day-to-day basis that actually boosts our sense of positivity in our life? And when we're doing that, then that brings us into a state of greater satisfaction, And when we are more satisfied in our lives, then we actually bring more to the table. And those that are relying on us feel a greater sense of buoyancy because we're really able to arrive and show up. And I think it can actually be as simple as acknowledging the feeling state, starting with the feeling state and saying, I feel, and allowing yourself to be like, gosh, what do I feel right now? Well, I feel, and typically people will say happy or angry. Those are actually the primary emotions that babies know, happy and angry. And that's sort of about it to start with. And then we become much more diverse and able to express. Anger is considered the tip of the iceberg. So if it's anger and frustration, it's actually deeper emotions that are really at play.
So it could be being really, really disappointed.
Oh, absolutely. Anger might lead in. I'm angry that got nixed by this. I'm angry at COVID, and I'm angry at the government, and I'm angry at the people who are telling me to stay in my house. And I'm angry at my neighbor. Right?
On and on.
And when we stop and we look at like what's underneath that anger, a lot of times it's things like disappointment, hurt, letdown, sadness, things that we perhaps might brace against. The path to happiness is actually stopping bracing against them, naming them for what they are, finding out what those are, and then finding a way to actually address them.
So why is this even more important for children and for parents who are helping guide children?
So children live very much in the moment, and they are constantly in a state of reading the environment around them. Their brains are actually in that developmental phase of actually developing pathways to be able to say, oh, what I see leads to this, and what I experience leads to this, mm-hmm. and what I feel leads to this. And their brains are like wiring up, so constantly. So if we are at a higher level of our coping level is sort of buoyed up, so we're closer to our stress response. Typically what I do is I describe this as if you take a line from like 0 to 10. 0 is like you're sleeping, and 1 or 2 is you're ready to engage with yourself but really not other people. And then between, let's say, 3 to 6, that's like social space. That's, I love, being able to cope and engage and interact with other people in a kind and gentler way. But then once we get over that like 6, 7 into that range, we start getting hot. We start getting short-tempered. We start getting snappy. You can probably see these things in yourself. And then once you hit your threshold, and everybody has a threshold, it's usually somewhere maybe around a 7. Sometimes people can hold their threshold and or manage up until about an 8. And then we actually enter something called our stress response. I actually think we should be calling it our stress reaction, because it's a very reactive state. We're either going to go into a fight mode, and
right.
that's when our words come out really aggressively. Children are going to hear that tone and that like, stop doing that, right? That shutdown thing. And they're going to go, oh my gosh, I must be doing something bad. And if I'm doing something bad, eventually, if it happens over and over and over and trickles in, it starts going, I'm bad.
I'm bad, yeah.
Right? So there's flight, parents who are like, I can't deal with that right now. And they take off. And for children who are in that space and feeling that frequently, that can lead to abandonment issues. And oh my gracious, right? We don't want to be abandoning our children. That's not the point.
Right.
But so if we're not managing our stress reaction, then we're actually bringing this to the table for our kids to process, and they don't have the neurological setup yet and experience to be able to understand it outside of themselves. Like, hey, that's about mommy, that's not about me. Kids can't do that.
Right. They take it all in.
Everything.
They become responsible for everything. So tell me what you're doing as far as AHA Studios Lotus Club's ABCs to Happiness, the new video series. What are you doing to address that, to help children, help families?
Because we're not able to do group work yet, and here we run social skills clubs. They're a little bit different from therapy. Therapy is where you actually acquire the skill set, and we do therapy groups, but those are typically short term, right? 8, 12 weeks to really learn a specific skill set. Our social clubs are a place to actually practice them. If a child doesn't have that many opportunities to actually practice with a diverse group of kids, that's where our social clubs really come into play. And they're great for all sorts of school-age kids who really struggle with social anxiety and ADHD, or even high-functioning autism. Are the kids and others now, right? That's who I've mostly been serving. Now, in the presence of the COVID period, there is such an overarching anxiety that kids are starting to feel like, oh, well, we're 6 feet and we're not. Well, what does that mean? Well, so
right, they're fearful,
right? And to be able to get to a place where we're not nurturing fear, but we're nurturing knowledge and understanding. And you mean we can hang out and play if we're 2 arms distance plus another person? We can do that. We can create those type of games and be in socially distanced vicinity with each other. So I have started to create, and will be launching, the Lotus Clubhouse, which is going to be a YouTube station where we'll have projects for kids, creative arts projects for kids. We'll have tips on being able to manage anxiety or manage difficult social situations or worry, whatever comes up. And we'll be going out into nature to actually find the fun and the play, because right now, and for this time period, outside is one of the safest places that we could possibly be hanging out with our friends. I think that the Lotus Clubhouse on YouTube will actually be able to really speak to the 3 and up.
Yeah, I think you're also going to have you're going to visit some guests virtually. And I think one of the guests you're going to visit is Miss Linda, that's me, and my puppet Red. I've been using my puppet Red in the Zoom sessions with my kids at school because I found that we could have conversations more easily. They'll be more forthcoming when they discuss it with the puppet than they will with me. And the puppet can also say things that a teacher might not say. So yeah, this is Red. Just wanted to show everybody Red. Hello, I'm happy to be here. And something that you should know about me is that no matter what, no matter how hard things are or how worried I am, I always find a way to face my fears. Thank you so much. That was really awesome.
Excellent. It's so nice being here. Thank you so much for having me.